Thank you. Glad to be here.
Welcome, Jay. This is a great honor.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here with you guys.
Yeah, it's Lammas, actually. The time is going so fast, I didn't even realize till I looked on the calendar. First harvest. Anyway, let's get into it. Yeah. Like if you're going by the farmer's wheel. So I mean, it has a lot. There's a lot more also that we don't need to get into here. But yeah, it's good idea, Jer. Good idea. Although I say search. Oh, shite. My reminder to turn my phone off. Anyway, Jay, let's dive right in.
Okay.
Dreams. And we like to start with kind of your early life and experience. So the things that, as far back as you can remember, your earliest memories of the world. So anything that, hard symbols like nature, TV programming, pink lemonade, just your earliest memories.
Earliest memories in dreams or earliest memories?
Earliest memories in life. And then if you have dreams that tie into early childhood, that would be awesome to tie those in.
Earliest dream, I guess, or memory would I guess be, I don't know, being in a child stroller type thing when I was 3 or 4, somewhere in there. Yeah, I mean, what else do you want?
Well, like, what things stick out in your early childhood? So did you like watching cartoons? Did you like playing outside? I guess what we're trying to do is kind of get an idea of the symbols that kind of formed your world, so that as we talk about dreams and dreaming and all that, there's an idea of where you come from.
Well, I come from Tennessee, so I guess, playing outside, nature, streams, the lake, those kind of things would be formative for me as a child. Growing up at my grandmother's house and my parents' house, having a cat, pretty standard, I guess, kid stuff. I can't think of anything that really stands out as like a out of place or abnormal when it comes to early childhood dreams.
Did you like cartoons? Were you a Looney Tunes kid or?
Sure. My era of cartoons was the early 80s, so He-Man.
Yes.
G.I. Joe. Hanna-Barbera, So not really. Looney Tunes was more prior to my day. That was 60s, 50s type stuff. So. Mm-hmm.
Well, plus everything was going round on Nick at Night and Nickelodeon by the 80s.
I lived in 1983, 4. I lived in a small, very, very small town in Tennessee. So we only had antenna, and the antenna would only pick up 3 channels. So when it came to cartoons, there was a very limited scope of what you could see, which was basically just whatever the networks would play at certain times.
Were you outdoors a lot?
Yeah. My family is a lot of hunting and fishing guides and that kind of stuff. So I grew up, at least until my dad entered the military, I grew up with that kind of an atmosphere for sure.
Excellent. Yeah, I like to nature myself. Did you as you get a little bit older, like say, I don't know, elementary school age, that period, what kind of stuff was interesting you in the world? What drew your attention?
By the time of elementary school, I was probably pretty early drawn to the arts in general. So I liked to draw, and I liked music a lot. I liked movies a lot from an early age. So that was probably what started my whole bent towards the arts, and probably, I would say, I guess, continuing with the cartoon period was probably my most obvious access to the arts throughout elementary. And then, you go to theme parks when you're a kid. You go to SeaWorld, you go to Disney. My mom worked for a company that owned SeaWorld. It was a publishing company. So,
oh, nice.
We pretty much go to SeaWorld, whenever. I lived in San Diego at that time. So, there was a lot of parks, a lot of field trips, that kind of stuff in San Diego, to Balboa Park, that kind of stuff.
Do you remember any dreams that kind of stuck out in this period?
I always have really, really vivid dreams. So even if I fall asleep for like 5 minutes, I'm immediately dreaming. So my mind, I guess, has had such a rush of dreams over the years that I can't remember any specific dreams during that period that stand out. But I've always had really intense, really elaborate, wild dreams. Everything from stories that were almost like complete movies playing out to played out musical pieces, like entire songs, comedy skits, even entire skits playing out in my head in my dreams, to very abstract, trippy things at times, all kinds of very extreme dreams. Nothing too bad though. Most of the time, I don't really have nightmares. I've had maybe one bad dream or nightmare every 5 or 6 months, maybe. Nothing from that period stands out as something that
that was specific back there.
It is memorable.
When you were so kind of in the, has your dream landscape shifted at all though? So it's not, you definitely sound like a prolific dreamer. Was there a time when, so do you experience dreams in black and white? Let me start there.
No, I've never had a black and white dream. They're always color. They're always very vivid. There's almost kind of an architecture to the dream world. I think that there seem to be recurring ones that seem to be in certain places that, and I can't prove this, but I've wondered at times if there isn't an actual consistent, maybe landscape of the dream architecture that is consistent over time. So in other words, is the path, for example, or the journey that I might take in traveling. So a lot of times in my dreams, I'm traveling like across the US or something. It seems to be fairly consistent. So in other words, the path that I take in the dream to get to, say, California from Tennessee, which is a frequent one, it seems to be the same. It seems to be fairly regular in different dreams. So it's not the exact same dreamscape or um, repeated dream over and over and over, recurring dream. I've had some recurring dreams, but actually, I kind of think that there's perhaps, this is just a theory I toy with, is the possibility that there is actually an inner structure to the dream world that is consistent.
Yeah, I agree. I experience that, even though sometimes, like, I have a house I live in generally, and it shifts. It's the same house, but it shifts, so it's always kind of the same house.
Right. Yeah. The detail, the sort of extraneous details can morph, but there seems to be an underlying structure that doesn't change.
And with this, not everyone we talk to experiences this, and so it's curious. I like to talk about it a minute more with this kind of observation of a structure that we observe here in waking life. Do you get a sense that you're actually having? Is there a sense that it's because there's architecture, because there's a structure, because you recognize it? Are you living a life there as well that is any way comparable to maybe this experience? Obviously slightly different.
I would say in some dreams, it seems that way. I've had dreams about those those storylines playing out as alternative versions of my life, but not necessarily in every dream, no. But sometimes, yes.
You had mentioned earlier about having dreams that spanned, that could span like a lifetime. Do you have an example of one of those, maybe?
Well, I don't know that it spans a lifetime. I do think there's a change in the experience of time and space in dreams. For example, sometimes if you doze off, I've noticed that something will seem like a very long time in the dreamscape, and then you kind of wake up and you realize that you really only nodded off for a minute or two. So I think that the experience of time has to in some way be very different in the dreamscape. I don't exactly know what it is or how to calculate that, but it does seem to be different. But I'm not saying that in one night I had an entire lifetime of a dream. I don't. I think that would be a little much. I can't. I don't have any example of that.
So not a whole Roy game.
Not a what?
Not a whole game of Roy from Rick and Morty.
Roy? What is that?
It was a Rick and Morty thing. They had a video game where you put a helmet on and you like live a virtual life of a guy until he dies.
Oh, okay.
It was kind of cool. I have actually had those where I went through beginning to end in probably what was a very short amount of time here, but it felt significant and long. In these, so let's back up a little. In the details of how you dream, what are some of the components, the nuances? So like sound and touch and the senses we experience here, are they congruent, or are they different? Are they amplified? How do you generally experience those things?
Fairly congruent, maybe a little amplified. I mean, it seems a little more intense, but things carry over as they seem to carry over in this world. So, if I'm in a place, or if I'm going somewhere, if I'm talking to someone, all the details are very precise. So it doesn't seem like, fuzzy or hazy, or it seems very lucid, very clear.
How's the quality of sound for you?
Always pretty standard. I mean, there's not any alteration that I can recall for sounds.
Okay, cool.
Normative.
And so in this kind of realm where we are with this conversation right now, what do you think about lucidity, and where does that fall, or how does that happen for you within the dream?
I have lucid dreams quite frequently. Most of the time, when I become lucid in the dream, I attempt to study the dream world best I can before waking up, because for whatever reason, lucid dreaming seems to hasten the waking up period. Seems to come pretty quick. So, um, I mean, it happens pretty frequently. I would say at least once a week. I have a lucid dream, probably maybe once every 10 days. Um, but it doesn't usually amount to. I mean, it's happened so frequently that I don't really. It's almost kind of expected. It's almost kind of normal now. So it doesn't. It's not surprising to me or unique. It's pretty standard. So my dreams tend to go in cycles or phases. So, like I said, there's maybe one bad dream every 6 months, but normatively speaking, the dreams are pretty vivid journeys, quests, encountering a lot of celebrities, encountering people from my past. Um, every now and then they're a bit fantastical with angels or demons or beings or something like that. There might be something like a portal, or there might be these kinds of things every now and then. There might be some fairly abstract, surrealist looking architecture at times, but typically it's not too crazy. In other words, there's not like, anything extreme going on, like people getting killed or anything like that. It's usually me on some journey of discovery.
Cool. I definitely want to get back to some of those details, like the portals and the woo woo stuff. I want to get.
I do. By the way, have a lot of dreams about tornadoes, but that's because this is pretty much Tornado Alley. So every now and then there are. I'd say maybe once every couple months I have dreams where there's like 6 tornadoes coming.
Oh wow! You're in California now?
No, I live in Tennessee.
Okay. Yeah, that's
Neighbor.
definitely
Neighbors.
there's tornadoes there. True, Jerry's in Georgia.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was just in Georgia not too long ago.
Sweet. Are you going up to Cryptid
And
Con
half my family's there.
in September?
To what?
Cryptid Con, the Bigfoot convention.
No, I didn't know what that is.
It's some.
Never heard of it.
It's a crazy. It's a cryptozoology.
I didn't even know that was going on,
Conference.
Jerry.
Cryptid.
Are you a student of
I am not.
Sasquatch?
I am not.
Okay.
I'm more of a mocker, but I know it's a thing.
No, I would actually go, and sounds like it rife for making comedy videos. Actually,
Exactly why I'm going. It's like
okay, yeah, I might actually go.
It's in I think Franklin, Kentucky.
You guys.
Franklin, Georgia.
Kentucky.
Oh, well, yeah, I know where that is.
I think it's Frank. I'll look it up. I'll put it in the show notes.
Interesting.
Yeah, there's a bunch of us going up there. A bunch of podcast guys. Anyway, sorry.
So when we talk about lucidity, what do you view the different states within a dream? How do you view them? So is there a separation between a lucid dream and astral projection or OBEs, and some of the other language that may go with being awake essentially within the dream?
I don't know that I have any hard and fast categorization of how to distinguish these. I mean, they could be similar, they could be different. I mean, they're questions I've pondered, but I don't have a definitive answer to that.
Have you ever had like an out of body
as far
experience?
as like experience.
Yeah, I would say when I had a really bad acid trip, I kind of had a out of body.
But not like an astral astral projection like that. I guess what Nish is kind of getting at is what's the distinction between astral travel and lucid dreaming?
I'm saying I'm not sure. I mean, I on the one hand, I could see the possibility that they're the same, and on the other hand, I could see the possibility that's something completely different. In other words, a dream state, even if it's lucid, might still just be the inner world of one's psyche, and astral projection or something might actually pertain to something external to the body. I don't honestly know. It's a good question.
Yeah,
I think it's all, even here, I think it's all a matter of states of lucidity.
Yeah.
Will you tell us about the LSD trip where you were having an out of body? That sounds intriguing.
And was that your only one?
Say what?
If you don't mind.
Yeah.
No, I don't care. I'll talk.
If you don't mind,
I've talked about it on podcasts. It's kind of funny, but it was a nightmare at the time. But no, I think I was 17, and we did just one hit, but I think it was pretty strong because, and drugs tend to affect me pretty intensely. So, it was a fairly, I guess, quote, normal trip until a certain point where I blacked out, and I went into the bathroom of the guy's house that we were at. We were partying, and I just kind of laid on the floor for about 4 hours, hoping that I would, sober up. And I kind of just dissociated, drifted out of consciousness, and the only thing that I recall from it was a sort of a single beam of light, like a point of light. And I felt that it was, I don't exactly know what that was. I tend to think it was something angelic or demonic, probably demonic. But maybe I was being warned or something, because, I came away from that feeling that it wasn't a good thing to do. So I know I didn't continue with, hallucinogens or anything like that. I did do LSD some more, but not many more times. And after that, it was kind of, thing that I didn't feel was healthy. So it did have similarities to the dream state. It did seem to be kind of a blending of the dream state and the waking state. In other words, LSD, I'm saying. But yeah, the sort of out of body experience was, and again, I don't know whether I was in or out of the body, but it was more of a blackout type of thing, except that, like if you drink alcohol and you get too drunk and you black out, you're out of it. You don't remember things. This is similar to that, except that you black out, but you're not out of it. You're still conscious.
Nothing like a bad trip to make you say hell no. It took a couple for me, and I said goodbye. Yeah, that's I can wholly relate to that experience of wanting to write it out. The disassociative stuff is intriguing on the level of on the comparative level of what we experience sometimes in the dream, the experience of dreaming.
Mm-hmm.
When you've had these and then moving back into your lucid stuff within dreams, when
Mm-hmm.
you're in those, and you did say that they're usually close to when you actually wake up. Do you find yourself encountering other beings, I guess, or entities that seem like they're not part of your unconscious, that they might be external in some way?
It's hard to say. I mean, it's another thing again where it could go either way. I've had some dreams that seem to have religious significance or to have kind of a prophetic significance at times. But as to the source of them, I couldn't say exactly whether they were pro or con, and that's because it's kind of hard to tell. Most of the time, I think if you have discernment, you can see if the effects of that phenomena are positive in your life or negative in your life. And if they tend to be positive, then you can probably figure that if it was from an external source, then it was from a good source. So I know that I mean that's not a very good answer, but I don't know what to say. I don't know. I mean, I guess that's part of the mystery, isn't it? We don't always know the source of these things. In fact, in the last year, I've had some pretty strong, strange visitations and dreams that I don't really talk about, just because I can't verify what that source of that is. So in the Orthodox tradition, we kind of have the normative approach to where we don't deny those things, but we also don't rely on those things. So we certainly believe in the possibility of spirits or angels or even the demonic interacting in this world. But because sometimes we might be deceived and we might follow those things too intently, they might lead us astray. So we just have a cautionary kind of oh, okay, well, that's interesting, that was cool, but I'm not going to stake my life on a dream or something. I'm not going to, like, if I had a dream that, oh, I need to move to Canada or something, I'm not going to move to Canada because a dream told me.
Even if you had it like over and over again. I think I would consider it.
I guess it would depend on like what kind of a dream. And maybe if it was over and over and over, and if I felt like it was really important, I guess it could potentially make me at least think about moving to Canada. But
have you ever had any prophetic dreams that you found later to come true? Yeah. Anything probably noteworthy to speak of?
Off the top of my head, probably 20 of in my lifetime of things that seem to come into being. I have a lot of dreams that relate to kind of big scale changes in, like, inventions, like things that come to pass in terms of being invented. I've had dreams that relate to what certain people in my life will do, namely like girlfriends or that kind of stuff. Sometimes the dreams I've had seem to signify what might really be going on behind the scenes in a certain situation. So, I think that we as human beings do have higher senses that are able to be activated, I guess you could say. I think that's part of
utilized.
Being made in the image of God. But at the same time, there's kind of a cautionary aspect to that as well, that this is something that, for example, amongst a lot of Orthodox saints is pretty prominent. They have a lot of clairvoyance, and they have a lot of knowing things ahead of time. And I certainly wouldn't at all class myself as a saint. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying that I've always had, kind of every now and then prophetic dreams. But I'm not trying to make anything special of that, because I think it's fairly common. I think, people quite often have those kinds of dreams.
Yeah, we do hear it a lot. And people think prophetic, like end of the world. But it's just even in your own personal life. You probably have
most of the time it's more related to personal life or big scale type social changes. Like I've had dreams about my own life and things that I thought would never happen that eventually did happen. That's all I'll say on that.
Do you have any examples to share?
I can specifically remember dreams maybe around the age 17 or 18 about meeting certain famous people and then eventually having met famous people. So that kind of a thing has happened. Certain actions that girls I would have dated, certain things they did, I dreamed about, and they did it. But that something like that could be chalked up. Well, maybe you're just dreaming about a common potential action that somebody could take, like somebody decided to break up with. I don't remember exactly what it was, but one of my buddies' dad died, I think, and I dreamed about that.
Do you remember the dream with his dad?
Yeah.
Do you feel comfortable sharing it?
Well, that was, again, also when I was about 18. So the only thing that I remember is having a pretty strong impression about that and getting a sense of it. And I woke up and called my friend, and sure enough, his dad had passed away. So, um, but again, that's kind of a common one. People do tend to have that kind of a sensation or dream pretty frequently too, of people dying, friends and relatives dying. So
Yeah, but sometimes the symbols are interesting with the dream imagery, because it's the
that
language
was
of
when I was
symbols.
like 18. I don't recall.
When you were speaking earlier about here, one of the reasons why we enjoy doing the show is because none of this is provable. Everyone knows this, and so we kind of all come to the table as equals. And and I think everyone agrees that there's a standard defragging that happens with your personal daily life, and then you get into the juicier, meatier stuff. And so we remain open, and we like to talk about stuff under that guise that none of this is provable. So that's kind of one of our laurels here. So on that note, when you were speaking earlier
Well, I
about,
would say if a person had a strong dream and they predicted something in the future, that would be proof.
right, well, precog stuff that kind of ties into like remote viewing, right, that's different, and that does tie into precog. But before we were talking about precog, you were mentioning some things that you had, some dreams you'd had recently that you don't really talk about because there's no way to validate them, and for that sake you've kept them private. I'm paraphrasing you, of course.
Oh yeah.
But those, I'm actually interested in hearing a couple, and we already know that there's no way to prove them, but the imagery is what I'm looking for.
um I'll just say that I had a dream with religious significance within the last 6 months that pertained to um, my own personal religious beliefs, and the imagery was very serene, very calm, very almost a sense of rest that I didn't have to continue to worry about where I was going theologically, which is something that's kind of bugged me for the last, I don't know, 18 years. Um, so I feel a lot more at peace and at rest in terms of my theological beliefs than I have in say 10 years ago. So that's all I will say about the dream, is that it was related to that, and the imagery was quite a bit of religious symbology that would pertain to Orthodox Christianity.
Sounds moving. One of the things we usually ask in the beginning before we get rolling too is, were what sort of religion were you brought up with?
I was raised Southern Baptist, and then uh, throughout high school, I didn't really care about any of that at all. And then by about senior year 18, I started going back to Bible studies with friends of mine, and then got back into evangelical Christianity at that time. And then about age 22 or 3, I started going to a Catholic church, got into the history of the church and history of the saints and all that. And then a few years later, 8, 9 years later, that led to starting to investigate Orthodox Christianity, which is unique and different from both Protestant and Roman Catholic Christianity. So for the last 10 years or so, my religious experience has mostly, not completely, but mostly been Orthodox Christianity.
How different is Orthodox from, say, like evangelical? They're like different silos completely, or
Vastly different than evangelical, because uh, the way that the church life plays out is pretty. It would be closer to Catholicism in the sense of, you have a church calendar, you have liturgy, you have ordered worship, you have um, actual fixed dogma that you believe. None of which is present in evangelicalism, really. And then, but it's also different from Catholicism in the sense that it's not there's nobody higher than the bishop. So there's no pope, there's no central locale in Rome or whatever. You kind of have decentralized national churches throughout the world. So you have Russian Orthodox, you have Greek Orthodox, you have Romanian Orthodox, you have
and they're headed by
America.
They're headed by bishops, those churches.
Well, what I'm saying is that there's not like one bishop of, say, the Church of Russia. There are, hundreds of, I don't know,
right?
I don't know exactly how many are, but
it's archbishop, I think.
Well, there's the Patriarch of Moscow, but he's just a bishop. I mean, the title is actually just honorary. So
Gotcha.
There's nobody higher than any bishop anywhere. So all the bishops are equal.
Who was the guy who went to Antarctica last year or 2 years ago? He was a Russian Orthodox leader, apparently. Well, that's what the news said. It's not important. It just reminded me of that.
I don't know. What was he doing?
He went down there. Remember when everyone was getting weird about Antarctica, and then like Kerry went down there on election day? And...
yeah, it was all in that same period. It was very big news because
Kerry went down there. Who's Kerry? Who?
John
Kerry, one of the presidential candidates at the
time.
time.
He was no. He was Secretary of
State.
State.
I don't know who or why anybody went to Antarctica. I mean, I remember when Antarctica was popular in the news. I remember like Aaron and Melissa Dykes made a video about it, but I don't know about what you're talking about.
It was the Russian Orthodox Patriarch.
So Kirill went to Antarctica.
Kirill doesn't say his name here. I'm not going to play the video. Trinity Church, out of Trinity Church. I think it's his church. It's all good. Yeah, he went down there in February of 2018. Kirill is his name.
I mean, I would imagine that
Kirill, that's what Jay just said.
Yeah, Kirill. I found
I would imagine there probably is a Russian Orthodox community in that exists there. I don't know. There's quite a few in Alaska, for example.
I like this progression though, from Baptist to Orthodox via Catholicism. It's very well rounded, actually. Just listening to it and kind of being imaginative of the process of going from one, which seems complete. Like when I think about Southern Baptists, I have family in Georgia. Some of them are rather kooky. Like there's some, they're not full on in the spiritualist movement, but there's some of them are interesting, and they seem less, to me as an outsider, they seem almost kind of woo-woo-ish. The charismatics. Yes, some of the Southern Baptist people I've known in Georgia, with having grown up half time there, were pretty eccentric in some other ways and superstitions. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, I suppose anything's possible. My experience is that Baptists are pretty typical, Bible Belt Republicans. So,
well, they were that too, but they had, the ones I'm thinking of in particular had, pretty interesting stuff that interested me. That seemed a little more on superstition side, but that's another conversation altogether. So
yeah, I don't know. I haven't really kept up with the Baptist world, so I wouldn't be surprised. I hear that they are, making some pretty big changes in terms of kind of going along with the more liberal ecumenical route now, which is curious because Southern Baptists had, for so long kind of opposed that stuff.
Right. I haven't heard that. That's intriguing, actually. Very.
I'm speaking of like Southern Baptist Convention kind of altering things, basically.
So as an Orthodox Catholic, was it?
Well, we would say that we are. I mean, the East and the West for the first 1,000 years of the Church was roughly the same, and then you split between Roman Catholicism and Orthodoxy happened around 1054 officially. So,
okay. But they're different.
So what's definitely? Oh yeah, totally. What's the relationship, or how does the Church feel about paranormal stuff? And and that kind of Fortiana.
Well, like I was saying earlier, the Orthodox tradition has quite a bit to say about, dreams and prophecies and clairvoyance and all that. So that's pretty well known and believed in terms of, amongst a lot of Orthodox saints, but it's not something. We don't make spiritual experiences like that our guide.
No, I was more asking if, like, is it frowned upon to, like, be a ghost hunter if you're in the orthodoxy, that kind of relation. What's the relationship?
Yeah. Generally speaking, occultic practices would be frowned upon and forbidden, and that would be specifically things like sorcery, trying to contact the dead, that kind of stuff would be forbidden. Yes.
So safe to say you've never performed any magic like that, ritual magic.
Perform magic rituals? No, I'm not.
Aside from the Catholics, like lighting candles to saints, I'm sure.
Yeah, aside from your religion.
Well, I guess it depends on what you mean by. What do you mean by magic? What do you mean by?
You've never practiced Enochian magic or Solomonic magic or
no, not at
chaos
all.
magic, mixed sigils. Well,
yeah.
You probably you actually you do use chaos magic day to day, but you just don't realize everyone does.
Well, I'm saying like in Orthodox theology, we do believe in theurgy. That's an old that's a church father concept, which in our view, for example, the divine liturgy is a theurgic action. It's an action of calling down and participating in the divine energies, basically. So, in a sense, you could call it, true divine magic if that's what you mean. But if you mean, am I going to call on Asmodeus and try to get him to do my bidding to bring me bags of gold? No,
that won't work out too well. Yeah, cool, interesting. No, I wouldn't do that either. Harry's kind of a dick.
Well, the Keys of Solomon and all that's kind of, that's like Renaissance era. So that in my mind calls into question the authenticity of it. So even if one was going to try to practice the Solomonic magic, this document from 1500s or something that's not Solomonic magic.
Anything from the 1500s is questionable at this point.
Yeah, there's a lot to talk about that.
I was thinking yesterday, I was listening to someone talk about it was like the new THC episode with that, I forget the guy's name, Magnora, I think. Doesn't matter. He was talking about Freemasonry and how they're, I guess, I don't know if it's the profane story they tell, but it's about rebuilding the Temple of Solomon. And there's some doubt whether there was ever. This is just I'm just talking, not a question. If Solomon ever existed, if it was just a fantasy. And I started thinking about what if the that story is actually a metaphor for, and the Temple of Solomon is your mind or your consciousness. So as you go up the Freemasonry ladder, you are improving and building upon your consciousness until it's perfect, which would be Solomon's temple.
Right. I mean, it's interpreted in different ways. Sometimes it's interpreted as the great work in terms of perfecting all of life. Sometimes it's interpreted as an individual psychological alchemical journey that you're talking about. And then at times it's actually believed in as we need to support, Zionists to actually rebuild the temple. So it's utilized in a lot of different ways.
And they're probably all the right ones too. they're all taken advantage of, put it that way.
What do you think about deja vu, Jay?
It's obviously I've had deja vu, but I don't know. I tend to think at times maybe it's remembering a dream that you had, a prophetic dream. That's entirely possible. Or it's just the brain kind of processing it ahead of time. But I don't believe in like alternate universes or anything like that.
When you've had deja vus, have you been able to pinpoint them to a dream you've had?
Maybe once or twice, but not anything consistently. No.
Yeah, interesting.
Okay, so if you don't believe in alternate universes, then your approach to, say, the alien contact that people are having is what, demonic?
I would say there could be multiple explanations for the alien UFO close encounter phenomenon, and one of those could be, yes, seeming contact with entities that are not actual extra biological entities, but in fact spiritual entities.
Mhm.
I would say that my own bad trip, the many cases I've read of people who've had trips and drug experiences, the history of shamanic religion,
Mhm.
for example, from Mircea Eliade, the famous comparative religion scholar. You can read Carlos Castaneda. There seems to be a pretty consistent pattern of this same experiences of what people think are the gods with the aliens. So that's one thing that I think is possible there. I think that there's also an aspect to which the similarities between ritual abuse and government experimentation could be one angle on it, which is possible because the experiments or the experiences of the abductees seem to be pretty parallel to ritual abuse. So I think there's something to that. And that probably ties into MK Ultra to a degree as well. This is just my personal theory on it.
Most definitely ties into it.
And then, but that's all I can come up with. That's as far as I believe. I don't think that there are actual ETs, like extra biological entities.
No, I don't either. No, I'm just curious. There's a lot of I would say the evangelicals would, first of all say they're demons. Everything's demons. Everything is demons.
Yeah, everything's demons in that view, and that's a kind of an oversimplification. Not everything is demons. Sometimes people are histrionic too, or they,
Sure.
And then there's sometimes things are fake. There's just completely concocted psychological operations. Like I think one of the first alien stories,
Betty and Barney.
Yes, is directly from sci-fi. Correct.
Yeah. Yeah, and I am a believer that Roswell was a staged incident of some sort. But
that's what I think. I think it was a psyop.
Yeah, totally. But look what it's wrought.
Yeah, exactly. Functions too perfectly for a military-industrial complex cover/lie to have people chasing their tails forever.
Yeah, it's just
meanwhile you can engage in a bunch of real R&D that relates to everything from surveillance to aerospace or whatever.
Are you familiar with the work of Joshua Cutchin?
Of who?
Josh Cutchin.
No.
Wrote a book called A Trojan Feast was his first book. Second one was called Brimstone, Deceit. And his new one is called Thieves in the Night, where he's talking about the similarities, the very, very many similarities between fairy lore and the current UFO activities.
Oh, okay. Actually, a couple. Yeah, I've seen it. I haven't read that guy, but if you read Yates's book, he actually talks about that. Yates has a book on.
He talks about Yates in his book.
Okay, yeah, I've read Yates on it, and then I read Peter Levenda's book, and his trilogy, Sinister Forces, and he kind of touches on that a little bit there.
It's just interesting. I mean, I don't know either way. It's just it was an interesting book, interesting stories.
Well, it seems to be parallel to the people who, for example, have the experience of the elves, doing DMT, and it fits perfectly with my worldview. I would say, yeah, absolutely. Those those entities are real. They're not physical in the sense of what we think of as in this dimension. They may be invisible. They may be physical in some sense, but just invisible. I don't know what their exact makeup is, but
yeah, no, I'm not asking for that. It's just an interesting thing to explore. And,
no, I think there's a definite parallel. Absolutely. I would agree.
So, did Nish ask you this already? If you didn't, tell me to shut up. So these entities, do you think they're local or non-local, or is it part of our collective unconscious or conscious?
I don't think that it makes sense really to talk about locale in terms of higher dimensions or spiritual realities, which I do think are real. I think that they're not spatio-temporal in the same way. Certainly, those entities can be present in a special way in time and space, but probably similar to the dreamscape. I don't think the spiritual realm is like over there. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Be, but
well, okay. So, are you saying that the spiritual realm is part of this? It's like overlaid. You're saying, or
it is
okay.
Exactly. But and there can be the transference of locale can be done in a different way than like moving spatially. I don't know how, but
yeah,
I'm saying
I understand what you mean.
Yeah, there's a I wrote actually some articles on this a long time ago that dealt with what mathematicians have said about dimensional studies. I don't mean that in the woo woo sense. I'm saying like actual mathematicians that talk about, you know, a tesseract or the higher level of reality, that they seem to have these properties that are similar to geometric forms that we can roughly have an idea of, maybe an analogy to, but we don't have a full picture of it.
It's all about the angles.
Yeah, so they'll use
like fractals and all that.
Fractals are sometimes brought into that, but more specifically, like certain crystals have the geometric form of higher dimensions. That's not woo-woo or conspiracy. That's confirmed. Like quasi crystals actually have a geometrical form, which is the same of Penrose tiling, which is the same as a tesseract or a hypercube.
Yeah.
So we know mathematically, even though we can't touch it or necessarily see it, we know that the next dimension up has just like our dimension has, you know, length, width, depth, etc. Right? That's what it is to be 3D or 4D. 5D is a hypercube. It's a tesseract, and it has a specific geometrical form, just like a 2D plane has a geometrical form.
But we can't visualize a hypercube. We need to visualize its shadow.
Correct.
Yeah. Yeah.
So in other words, things are slippery, to use the description of certain physicists like Lisa Randall. She speaks of it that way.
With all this in mind, with dimensional realities and all that, what do you actually think dreaming is? Like I said, beyond the daily,
like is it
defragging? What do you think the process is? Is it, carry on, Jerry?
No, I was gonna say like brain function or travel, you know, something like that.
I think that there is an inner world and an outer world, and both of these are very real, and they do connect in a certain way, metaphysically or ontologically. So when you dream, you are inside the inner universe that is you, and it really is an entire landscape. It has, in some way, a connection to the collective unconscious and the external world and everybody else's escapes. I don't know how that is, but it does. But I believe that it is. It's not just an inner world of symbols. I believe that it's an actual inner world. It's real. It's not real in the same sense as the common reality that we all share. So I'm not saying that. I think there can be levels of things that are real, levels of reality. But your inner world of symbols, the inner architecture of your psyche and who you are, who it is to be you, your innermost man, your spirit, is real, and it has a lattice work. It has a structure to it, and it plays out in the dream world. But as to how exactly the phenomena in the dream are real and yet not real, that's, you know, probably one of those mysteries that we won't ever know in this life. I don't know, but that's my suspicion.
With that said, how what do you think then the nature of waking life is?
You cut out there. I didn't hear you.
With all that kind of loosely defined, what do you think the nature of waking life is?
I mean, I think that it is. I do believe in a real external physical world that's objective, that's common to all of us. I believe that it, has the dimensions and proportions that we see, and then of course I think there are higher dimensions as well. We talked about. I don't know how many or how high they go. There's probably a whole bunch of dimensions. Um, uh, but I mean, I don't really know what to say other than that the historical time space world that we experience, I do believe is absolutely real. In other words, I don't think like the external world and the waking state is an illusion, or I don't believe any of the Far Eastern philosophies.
Right. Well, we're clearly having an experience that seems quite tangible. It's
Sure.
Same as within what we view as dreaming.
Mhm.
Where do you see?
I don't know that I would say they're the same though, and
They're not the same. I
yeah,
mean,
they're
clearly.
not. Right. But I'm saying I would tend to say that the dream experience is the inner person, the inner world of the person working out not just the defragging that you talked about, but it is part of life. Actually, I don't know. I don't know how to explain it. I think that it demonstrates that we're more than just physical, that we do have a soul. I think dreams are a great testament to that.
That's where I wanted to go with setting this up. So you've you keep saying, you keep identifying maybe our personas or ego state, which is really a lower state than, or underlies the personas, at least in a Jungian sense. What do you think the soul is, and how does that play out via these two realms that
Yeah.
seem to be intertwined?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are insights in Carl Jung, and I've read a decent amount of Carl, not a whole lot, but a decent amount. But I also don't necessarily agree with all the Jungian stuff either, because he tends to view things in a kind of Gnostic way. And as Orthodox, we have a specific kind of anthropology that we believe is true, that we adhere to. So there's
Well, we're
insight.
interested in what you think. So
Well, I know, but I'm Orthodox, so I'm telling you
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
I don't believe the Jungian scheme in toto. So we believe that the soul is unique to the individual, and that an individual doesn't have just a body and a soul, but also a spirit. And we believe that the spirit is the highest faculty in man,
Mhm.
which God gave to us to know Him directly. So life is a process of recovering that, what we call a nous, and that's the faculty for knowing God directly. So that's kind of what the journey of life is as some of the church fathers and mystics of the desert, for example, speak of remembering God. It's almost like mankind has forgotten God in a way, as one of the results of the fall. And so there is a remembering of God that occurs, which is related to that inner journey that we were talking about. But it's not just an inner journey. There's also the external world and interacting with and loving other human beings as well. So in other words, that's my answer.
I also come from the perspective. Oops. Sorry, I think I roboted. I adhere to the spirit and the soul thing. And so it plays out a lot in my own personal work and all that.
Mhm.
And from my understanding of Jung as well, he spoke a lot about the difference between the two. I'm wondering what your ideas or concepts of death are as tying into all of this is kind of a thread, since we kind of, that's a point at which we get, right? We're kind of going towards, and so there's a lot of esoteric stuff you can wrap it around in whatever,
Mhm.
from whatever perspective you're coming from. But in general, what is that? And do you see it playing out in your life through states of consciousness such as dreaming, or lucid moments within your daily life?
Well, one thing I want to say is that when Carl Jung talks about anima and the soul and spirit, he's kind of speaking of it in the Platonic sense, and in our anthropology, we don't believe in the Platonic view. So there might be aspects of Platonism where we agree in terms of like mathematical structure of the world or something like that, but we don't agree with the Platonic anthropology. So I wanted to make that clear to people that are listening. I'm not advocating Platonism. So we think that it's something different. But as to how it relates to death, could you rephrase the question? You said, what do daily experiences
What, so
death?
what are your concepts of, and your concepts and maybe your deeper understanding of what is death and what is its function or meaning in this larger process of
Oh,
what we're going through?
well, I believe in the fall, and the Orthodox doctrine is different than the Western view of the fall of man. So we don't believe that God is angry at everybody because of what Adam did. We believe that Adam's sin introduced a state of being, which it has put man in a state of corruption. But it has nothing to do with like we have to pay back, the debt of original sin or something like this. That's not the Orthodox view. So death is the introduction of spiritual and physical corruption and separation from God. And so this life is basically a kind of hospital to repair that life in communion with God. So death is, in our view, not a bad thing, but actually a blessing because it's a necessary step on the restoration of human nature. So death for us is victory over. The irony is that in our view, the very thing that Satan intended to enslave man with, death, has actually become the thing that frees man. Now we don't mean that in a Gnostic sense, like the body is the source of man's problem. It's not. Morals are the source of man's problems. Bad morals and a bad heart, not his physical body, which is why we believe in the resurrection. So unlike most or all Platonic or Gnostic type views, we actually believe that the body will be resurrected. So death is basically the stage to where this body is more or less shed. The spirit goes on, and then eventually we believe that there will be a resurrection, and the body will be restored to kind of what was intended to be the case with Adam and Eve, but in an even greater sense.
How do you see timelines like past, present, future, linearity, and causalities playing into all that? I believe we don't die, but that's my own stuff. So I think death is an interesting concept to ponder.
Well, I think the body dies, but I don't think that like our
right. I mean, clearly our body dies, but I mean, you know what I'm saying.
Well, some people might say that's illusion too, but I don't know.
Okay, let me clarify. I definitely think we shed the skin.
A lot of people will say it's an illusion.
Yeah, I think we do shed
well, just listen
shell.
to my binaural beats and you'll be regrow your body.
That's too woo-woo for me, actually. But anyway, yeah, so
what was your question again?
I actually forgot and all that. It was good too. Geez. Man. Oh, past, present, linear realities and causalities through that. So looking at being born, going through life, and then dying. But when you were talking about the resurrection and the way you presented that information brought this question up. Like, how do you see the way we perceive time playing into all that?
I don't believe in cyclical time. That's more of a pagan view. I believe that there is beginning, middle, and end, both to our lives and to history as well. But of course, end doesn't mean that it stops. It means that it moves into like a higher state of being. So in our view, all of reality will be transfigured in in the eternal state. But we don't believe that the eternal state will necessarily be a whole lot different than it is now. There will still be a universe. There will still be planets. There will still be people. There will still be Earth. Um, you know, cities. All the things that we're used to will still exist because we still have physical bodies and physicality. That's not something that's done away with. But as to causality, I don't know that I believe anything strange or out of a sorts with what most people think of causality being. Do you mean like can we affect causes in like back in time, like Back to the Future or something? What do you mean?
Yeah, and so that would bring in. I mean, you already mentioned you don't
No,
subscribe
I
to
don't think so.
multiverse and all that, but when we start talking dimensional stuff, and then free will to some extent, and do you think, is there like a predestiny in your view of things?
Well, one thing about Orthodox theology is that we don't tend to believe in any kind of dialectical tensions. So, for example, we don't put a tension between um, the sovereignty of God and the will of man. So, for us, God is both sovereign and at the same time, man has free will. And so, we actually just accept the fact that that is mysterious, and we'll never actually understand how. How is it that God is, all knowing, and at the same time, we still freely make decisions that we're culpable for? I don't know, and I don't know that anybody's ever. But that's actually a problem for anybody. So it's sometimes people will say, "Oh, well, that's a problem for you theists." Actually, that's a conundrum for anybody. It doesn't matter what, even if you're an atheist and you think that the atheist has the exact same issues of how how does the individual atheist, if he's just a determined part of chemical reactions, how is he culpable, or how does he deserve any praise for his actions if he's just chemical reactions, right? In other words, it assumes that you freely did A, B, C. So that's a good question. I mean, you're asking some pretty heavy, but basically we're compatible with the philosophical language of predestination, free will. We're compatibilists.
And then so wrapping this into dream realm again, do you see, and I feel like you answered this question, I guess I want clarity on it. Are you able to access a one-on-one, or I don't know, so I'm looking at it through your orthodoxy. How does the dream world communicate with you? Like, are you able to actually have a direct access to God through dreams, or how does that work?
I would say that the direct access to God is something that we strive for at all times. So it doesn't really have anything to do with the dream state per se. I mean, God could certainly speak to us at any time that he wants to, and I think God does speak to us at all times if we are paying attention, if we are in the right frame of mind. But it doesn't necessarily have any special relationship to the dream state per se. If you read for example, there's what's called the Philokalia, which is a classical work from Orthodox mysticism and spirituality. And
I'm actually familiar with it.
Okay, there's not a tremendous amount, but dreams are mentioned there. Many spiritual writers in our tradition, talk about dreams, and really not much more is said than what I've said so far. In other words, we're not charismatics in the sense of like the evangelical charismatics, but we also don't deny the reality of miracles. We think that all these things are very real and very possible. So prophetic dreams, visions, these kinds of things do happen, but we also sort of test them against the tradition as a whole. So in other words, like if I had a vision, well, take Mormonism for example. For us, that's immediately canceled out. I mean, there's no new revelation that God's going to give some goofball con man, in 17 whatever, to know that there's like a new way to follow God, right? We would immediately just cross that off, because it's a complete violation of our tradition as a whole. So for us, tradition is a good thing, and it's a rule and a guide to, on the one hand, still allow for spiritual experiences or dreams or visions, and at the same time to not be misled by those things. So that's not the kind of answer you were looking for, but um, in other words, no, just to be simple, the dream state doesn't necessarily have a special relationship to how one would contact or speak to God per se.
Okay. Yeah. And I'm really open. So I don't have like an idea of what I'm looking for, but I want to get into a couple things, in the dreams themselves. Have you, do, have you experienced what, I mean, everyone has, but water dreams, like the ones that seem like deep water, or where you're in there with, maybe they seem a little bit alarming or not pleasant?
Hmm. Actually, not that I can think of. Um, I'm sure that at some point in my dream history, there was ocean or lake or water,
Yeah, the deep water.
but the abyss, uh,
Yeah, yeah.
not that I can recall. I mean, I've always enjoyed the ocean. I learned to swim at a young age, so there's never been anything that was like, some people are deathly afraid of the ocean, and it's like a weird fear of their phobia or something. I don't have any fears or anything like that. I'm actually moving by the ocean, so I'm very pro ocean. Um, yeah.
What
I wish I
about,
could give you more, but no, I can't think of anything to do with
no,
water.
that's all right. It's great. What about animals in your dreams? And in particular, maybe some of your own animals you've been around or cared for in the past. Those are even more important.
Yeah, maybe like a family dog or cat has popped up every now and then in a dream, but not
Nothing that pops out.
most of the time. My dreams are I am on some long journey across the US, or I am in some giant strange hotel facility with all of these doors and secret passages and secret basements and hidden doorways, and or I'm on some sort of mountain trek, and it's almost always some kind of long hero quest type thing.
Yeah, that's what those sound like.
Most of the
What?
time too, they and I'm not a big video game player, but a lot of my dreams, oddly enough, they seem like video games. They seem like you've got to make it through this say stage, and you've got a gun, and you've got to, like, laser blast all of these Jawas and Wookiees or something. I mean, I did have a dream very similar to that recently, where
Do you
it's
play
like
Star Wars Online?
yeah, no, I don't play any kind of games like that, really.
Oh, can you share this one with us?
The dream?
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, this was probably because of writing the second book and thinking about the Matrix. I actually we were talking about on a couple podcasts that they're building Star Wars world at Disney. I dreamt that uh, the experience of Star Wars world was actually that you go and you kind of link up to a Matrix, like you lay in a pod and they they hook the thing in the back of your neck, and you literally enter into a virtual video game scenario. It was like the Moss Eisley Cantina, and everyone was shooting lasers and this kind of stuff. So it was a very vivid dream. It was a very realistic battle sequence, and that's all that stands out in that dream. But Most of the time my dreams are that kind of stuff where it's like, I'm going to be, going on some big TV show and I get to meet Jerry Seinfeld or something like that. It's one of those two types of dreams.
Yeah. What about specifically people that have passed that you know? Like outside of the dream you gave us where you woke up knowing that person had passed. But what about people that have already passed that are connected to you somehow in this life?
Yeah, I had one very elaborate dream where I met Gary Cooper, and he took me on a flight path, showing me like, 'cause I think he did fly a plane or something, like he was involved in, or it was it was in the movie. I can't remember, but there was something to do with flying with Gary Cooper in a war sequence that was very vivid. And I remember asking him, I said, you've passed away, right? Like you're not alive. And it was sort of a weird kind of, no, I'm perfectly alive. That way, I vividly remember that conversation. So that was a weird one.
How real did that feel? Like how lucid did it feel?
Very. All my dreams are extremely.
Okay, so yeah, you've reiterated that. I guess I'm always asking just to see if there's a.
It's just like, that I consider an experience that you had, regardless if it wasn't a dream or not. It was completely real to you.
Yes.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's just.
I'm not even I don't even care about Gary Cooper. I don't. I mean, was he in some kind of like World War II movies or something?
Oh, I'm sure.
You might know.
But that is more significant to me and gives it a little more poignance that, you're not like an avid fan. You don't know his whole.
No, I don't care anything about
it. Exactly. So that's why it's more interesting.
Yeah.
As a dream.
Yes. He was in Mr. Deeds. So, I mean, he was in a lot of movies and a lot of war movies, but he was active.
Okay.
Up
Makes
until 52.
What was that one?
He was active until 1952, and he even starred in silent films.
Oh, yeah, wow. He goes way back. Right. Well, I want to ask you a couple woo-woo questions, so don't bear with me. And it's just sure. It's good fodder. So what do you think about the whole, I'm expecting these to be interesting from you, by the way, Jay, since I do listen to your presence in the world.
Okay.
What do you think about the whole moon landing situation in space?
We did a boiler room last week, actually, where we covered this. So,
I missed that.
Yeah, if you listen to last week's boiler room, I think we spent about 30 minutes talking about the moon. I'm a moon skeptic. I don't claim to know exactly what aerospace technology we do have. I do believe that lower space, satellites and all that, I tend to think that's real. But I'm skeptical about whether we went to the moon. And I don't find the evidence that's out there convincing. But I'm not a flat earther or anything like that.
It's funny, a lot of times people will make that same they're healthily skeptical, of the moon, but they have to separate themselves from the flat earther thing. And I
think that's been done on purpose.
Yeah.
It's also, the whole flat earth movement's been really connected to the evangelical movements too. It's the way it got polluted, or I don't even know what it is. If that was its intent all along, to just discredit by inclusion. But yeah, no.
Yeah, right.
We're not flat earthers either.
Yeah, that's usually how the system does things, is they toxify something and then they just try to associate everybody that they don't find favorable with the thing that they toxified. That's a kind of a classic, counterintelligence thing.
It's funny too, because the some of the actors out there, I would say, would incorporate into their story other actors who are unverifiable. For instance, like the QAnon stuff. which you're familiar with, right? And you know who David Wilcock is?
Yeah.
Okay, so like they adopted QAnon as part of their side. You know, that he's telling truth, you know, and he's on our side. That kind of shit. It's like the echo chamber builds upon itself. It's pretty funny.
Right. Yeah, no, I pretty quickly was skeptical of Q, and like I think about a week or two after it began, I made a video that
I remember
that was anti-Q. So I haven't followed it. I know it's continued going, but
I haven't either. It's still going, but they're crazy. It's a crazed lot. It's just more divisiveness in the public.
Yeah.
Whatever.
So also in this, we'll kind of shifting over to another sector. What do you, and we touched on it earlier, but what do you think all this kind of hoopla about Antarctica? And again, of course, you don't know, but I mean, what do you think about possible old technology, all that stuff?
I'm probably skeptical about that. I haven't followed it closely, but I did actually dig up when I was a research assistant some old archive material that did vindicate that there was a Nazi base there. That's actually true. Yeah. I'm not saying that Hitler like is still hanging out there and like, you know, eating ice pops or something, but I don't believe that. But there was a Nazi base there. Beyond that, I can't really say any more than that. It's definitely closed off for research purposes, but that probably relates to, you know, stuff to do with like surveillance and satellites and that kind of stuff, geopolitical type stuff. I don't think it relates to flat earth or aliens or underground bases per se. I mean, there could be an underground base. I think the Nazi base was supposedly underground, if I recall, but that was a historical piece that I dug up probably about 2013, and I'll never find it again. But if you're a research assistant, you'll have access to a lot of stuff in a university that you don't have when you're outside the university. So they kind of keep the information gated off, actually. So I do miss the days when I had access to JSTOR and basically all of the research hubs. That was a nice time.
So audit some classes.
No, I hate academia.
Oh,
I left it because I can't stand it.
Ditto. So okay, and then moving from the moon to Antarctica to get a trinity on this, deep water, underwater, as far as we know, we haven't explored the depths. Do you think there's possibility of something going on down there that people may be calling alien, but it's actually not because it's here? So
I don't know. I really don't. I figure that there are probably underwater bases, you know, that the Navy has and whatnot. They probably have, you know, fancy aerospace tech that can fly out of the water and up, you know, back into the water. That probably exists. That doesn't seem implausible. But as to strange creatures, you know, strange creatures are discovered all the time that relate to, you know, extreme depths.
Oh yeah,
the ocean.
yeah.
So, but alien life, no, I don't think that there's.
Well, if you think about it, if somebody sees, say, our tech that's underwater that can rise up out of the water and fly, that could easily create a big hoopla of speculation that would immediately lead to all kinds of.
Could there be like a hidden civilization underwater?
Yeah, or maybe something like that. Like, where are you with the timeline as far as, there's a lot of talk about this right now, like as far as how old things really are. Is it possible there's an older civilizations under the waters?
Even under the ground too. I mean, just like
Is our timeline of is it
I think that there are probably very large underground areas. I'm skeptical that there's like a civilization there. It would be neat, but you know,
what about past civilizations
type stuff? I don't say what?
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. What about past civilizations like Atlantis, Lemuria, those kind of things? What are your thoughts on that?
I think there was an Atlantis. You know, Plato talks about it.
Right.
I don't think they had saucers and stuff. They weren't floating around, but I think there was an Atlantis. I think it's possible that ancient civilizations might have had high technology. I hold that out as a possibility, but you know, it's just in the realm of like fun speculation. I don't know that it's necessarily certain, but
I doubt they had computers like we do, like digital. I don't think they had digital technology. I would imagine they had more natural tools that, you know, vibration, frequency kind of shit, like Core Castle kind of stuff to make the pyramids. Yada, yada, those kind of things.
Well, when Plato talks about Atlantis, he doesn't describe it as like magical. You know, he describes it as a place, and it, you know, it collapsed because of its kind of form of government or whatever Plato says about it in 2 or 3 of the dialogues. I think it's in the Crito and it's in the Timaeus, I think. But I do hold out certain possibilities for those kinds of, for example, in the Phaedo, there's a really interesting section where Socrates talks about that there are hidden civilizations. I don't know that anybody exactly knows what he means or what he's talking about, but what he says is that there are caves and rocks and hollows in the earth that do lead to civilization. That is in the Phaedo, and in fact, actually, certain online publications of it have excised that. So you actually have to look at, like, I have, I think, the 1950s Jewett translation of Plato, and in my copy of the Phaedo, it's there. He says that at the end. You might say, well, so what? You know, he was just speculating on some ancient guy. Well, the weird part is that he says that there are other colors on the color spectrum that we don't even know about, and it's only been modern science that has actually confirmed that there are other colors on the color spectrum. So there's a whole bunch of interesting things in Plato's dialogues that, for example, the Platonic solids and the structure of things like molecules and whatnot, there's no way that they could have known that. To my knowledge, that has never been explained. To my knowledge, it's never been explained. And in fact, I've never heard anybody talk about it until I went and read the Phaedo and did talks on Plato lectures 3 years ago. I've never heard anybody talk about this. Like, what is Socrates talking about when he talks about there being other colors on the color spectrum? Nobody knows. So on the one hand,
just blame him for being drunk or something. Oh, he was out of his mind when he wrote it.
Yeah, but that's a pretty precise thing to say. I mean,
no, I understand. There's a lot of
the fact that they were also inducted into Pythagorean mysteries, and so they knew about, you know, the geometric structure of reality down to the smallest level of how things are put together is also, you know, they didn't have microscopes, they didn't know that. So,
right,
you know, that's some really fascinating stuff that makes me think, well, it could be that there were, you know, we don't know what life was like before. For example, I believe in the flood. I believe Genesis 6 is describing historical events. Genesis 8, you know, we don't know what the world was like. It could have been very different back then. You know, during that time period, there could have easily been during the period of Noah, you know, something like Atlantis. You know, we don't know. So, on the one hand, I understand the skepticism, and I try to be skeptical. But I also, on the other hand, know that when it comes to academia, a lot of these academics, they don't know anything, and they pretend to know. So there's a lot more that we don't know than we do know, and that, I think, you know, some people would call me crazy, but how come I read Plato scholars all through college and grad school? Nobody ever talked about that aspect of the Phaedo. Well, it's probably,
one of the friends,
they don't have an answer to that. They just don't fucking know.
There's go ahead.
One of the friends of our show, Robert Powell, talks about this at extensively. And actually, a lot of what you've been talking about reminds me of Robert, who's a scholar.
He talks about what?
All this stuff with the
Plato and the Phaedo.
Plato and the colors, and like he's deep into that, and he's also, I believe, on the same. I consider it esoteric Christian path. I don't have the P's and Q's right here at the tip of my tongue, but I just wanted to say I have heard him talking about this stuff.
Okay. Well, I mean, and I'm not saying that I believe the earth is hollow. I'm saying I don't know, but it's interesting. Socrates said those things.
Right.
And nobody ever talks about that. Why?
It's interesting. I'm wondering if it's starting to come to surface more with more people going back and revisiting those works now. Like I'm talking about real recently, like pretty much in this modern experience in the last couple years.
Well, yeah, because of the internet, because of the ability to, for a lot of people to exchange information in a way that was never possible before. Right. So you could have that aspect, not necessarily covered up, but you could just not talk about it. You know what I mean? Like if you could have professors for the last 300 years in universities teaching Plato, and they don't know. They don't know.
Right.
They just don't know. I mean, there's a lot that we don't know. This is one thing that I learned in academia that was good, was that you're given the impression maybe before you go into the academic world that, they've got it figured out. They know their stuff there. And then when you go, what you learn is that actually what they've got figured out is some super precise niche in some single discipline.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't know anything else. They might know everything about, I don't know, like Christopher Columbus's, one diary that he wrote. Some guy spends his whole life writing his dissertation on that thing, and he doesn't know anything else. And that's what you tend to find in academia, is that they're hyper specialized. They don't know anything else about anything else, and so they can't make connections between disciplines, and they're more or less worthless because I'm not saying that it's worthless to study, Christopher Columbus's diary or whatever, but if you know everything about that and nothing about anything else, you're not worth a whole lot, really.
It's not like the classical education system where it did.
No.
You got a well-rounded, view of everything, and all of it was in depth, actually.
Right. Modern education is designed to keep you from making connections. That's the point.
I wholeheartedly agree.
It's the nightmare of specialization.
Right. And we're seeing it play out.
And then like the polar opposite of that is compartmentalization.
Right.
The business side. It's crazy. I forgot what I was going to say.
Yeah, you're not supposed to make any connection, say, between geometry and biology.
Right, because it's different science.
You're not supposed to say, hey, why does it look like it has mathematical structure everywhere? You're not supposed to say that. Like,
one of the things you talk about,
heresy.
The Phaedo talking about, I forgot what it was now. Whatever you just said, why the spectrums of light, that's what it was. I apologize. Mm-hmm. The Dogons have left symbology that seems to represent atomic structure and things like that. Mm-hmm. And you could go back and say, well, how did they know that? It's the same kind of thing.
Yes, I actually watched a TED Talk by a guy who I'm not trying to be obscure. I just don't remember the title of it, but something to do with he's a mathematician who studied the geometrical patterns and structures of the artwork of some African tribe, and he concluded that it had such complex patterns that the mathematics behind those patterns pointed to like high level calculus and stuff like that. Now, I don't think that obviously the tribe had no idea what calculus was, but his point was that there was some consciousness in the tribe's artistic, their artisans or whatever, that was able to tap into mathematical patterns and principles that were pretty high order. Again, they didn't know. I mean, we see this all the time in artists across the board. Most artists don't give a damn about calculus, but they can sometimes present very, intricate patterns that utilize high mathematical principles. MC Escher's art is this way. I don't know that maybe Escher was a high level mathematician, but most of the time people are divided across either the left hemisphere or the right hemisphere of the brain. So most of the time, if people are highly gifted in right right hemisphere and they're artistic, they don't care about calculus. So yes, there is something to this notion of tapping into higher order principles, even if you don't necessarily know how to explicate it in a systematic way, logically, or in an abstract way. You can formulate it in a physical way through the art.
Yeah, it's almost like a knowledge base that we can connect to when we are able to, and then you get that information in a way that you can understand. I think that math guy was Ron Eglash. Ethno-mathematician, studies
that might be it.
The way math and cultures intersect.
If he does a talk on African tribal art, TED Talk, then that's probably him.
Is the one I looked up just now is about fractal.
That sounds like it.
It was fractal patterns in the layout of the housing, I think. The villages, yeah.
That's it.
Yeah, that looks pretty interesting.
It is very fascinating. And then I would also recommend there's a fascinating talk by Jason Lisle, Lisle, about fractals in nature. His talk is really good. He's got 2 or 3 talks that are on that.
I've enjoyed those.
Yeah, he does information science and he looks at fractals in nature. So we know that when you start down that path, what you start to realize is that there's obviously a connecting bridge between the mathematical forms that we have in our mind, the mental scape, you could say, and the patterns that are out there in nature. Because if there weren't, then it wouldn't work. You couldn't do mathematics from your mind and build bridges based on these principles, but you can. So obviously there's a bridge between the abstract conceptual entities and what we do out there in the external world. And that means that the external world is not chaotic, but it actually does have structure and it operates on principle. Hence it's designed.
I was just going to say that. I was going to say, how can you escape a designed universe?
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's very obvious if you come from this perspective.
All right. I'm looking for questions from the audience.
Did you ask already, Jer?
Of course. All right.
I don't look at the chat.
Oswald has a question. What do you think about?
By the way, real quick before you ask, I'm sorry, but it reminded this talk on African those designs and fractals. That reminded me of my essay on The Shining that's in my book. I had come across a really fascinating guy who analyzed the patterns of one of the tribes near Australia, like an island off of Australia. And he looked at all of the artwork that they did on the backs of turtles. Like they would take a turtle shell and draw this artwork. And he found the exact same thing, that they had these very intricate labyrinth patterns. And so the labyrinth, obviously, in The Shining is a big part of the story. So what I did was I looked at the journey of the soul after death, according to this tribe. It wasn't Dogon, it was something, but in the way they structured the labyrinth that they drew mathematically, and it's amazing. It's fascinating. And what you see is that, again, this is another example of this very intricate mathematical pattern that this tribe that has no knowledge of mathematics, can explicate in their artwork.
Yeah, that stuff deeply fascinates me because of its appearance out of context to how we would view it in this society. I meant, it's funny you just said that, because earlier, and I see I wrote a note here, I wanted to get your idea on the Australian Aboriginal idea of dreamtime. Like, from your perspective, what do you think is going on with that?
I'm not familiar with the Aboriginal perspective on dreamtime. Enlighten me.
Oh, Wow, Jay, I'm surprised. The Aborigines of Australia have a thing they call dreamtime, and it's ancient and been it's oral process, but it's also something they participate in because it's real. It's basically ties into their everyday mythos and their creation
Mhm.
myths, and but the dreamtime is as real as this, and
Oh, okay. Somebody brought this up. Forget where, but um, I don't know. I was on a show or something, and somebody was saying, "What do you think about the view that the dream time is just as relevant and real as the waking time?" I think is what the way they asked it.
mm, interesting.
That's one of our questions usually.
Yeah, when you were in the bathroom earlier, Jerry, I
missed it.
actually
Oh.
got that. Yeah, where we tied those in.
No, so the Aboriginal Dreamtime is more of a unity space where everyone dreams together to, it's their worldview that there's this, it's almost like a night world. I can't even explain it right because I don't understand it that well, but it's a thing that was here and
Mhm.
everyone was in Dreamtime, and then now they're in this realm and they're going to go back to Dreamtime. So it's more like a yuga concept.
Yeah, I've never found a way to actually simplify what it is.
Either.
It's kind of complex, but and so people that have looked into it a little bit then kind of understand. So that answered itself.
They called it the everyone.
Yeah.
Because
it's fascinating stuff, though, Jay. It's very fascinating.
Okay, yeah, I'll have to take a look at that.
So back to your questions, Jer.
I gotta find it. Oh, we got mind control questions. You should be good, happy about that. Okay, what did you? By Oswald. What do you think about near-term human extinction and/or climate change?
I believe that it's a scam. I do a globalist book series, which is a series of lectures on writings from the top globalists and social engineers, strategists, planners, etc. Technocrats. This is everybody from H.G. Wells to Bertrand Russell to Zbigniew Brzezinski to Jacques Attali to Miles Copeland of the CIA. A pretty diverse group of globalists, and I think it's pretty open and shut case that climate change and as it was previously called global warming is a big linchpin in their strategy, and it's a complete hoax, complete scam.
It's a scarcity play for carbon. Okay. What do you think about East Salem Institute and Tavistock and social engineering? I know you got a lot to say about that.
Talks on both of those, and I think you could look at Esalen as the brain behind the 60s counterculture in many ways. So it's a lot of the cultural changing people. You could look at Stanford Research, Changing Images of Man. You could look at Tavistock is also kind of the UK version of that, as well as MK Ultra and social engineering, the preeminent places for learning social engineering. But yeah, I would just say, excuse me, somebody who wants more specifically on that, I have a specific talk on Tavistock that's it's had 10 or 20,000 views.
I'll put that link in the show notes. So what do you think about the relationship, or how it says, how much of theosophy has been carried over towards that work or led into it? If
quite a bit. I mean, there's a lot of the people who were preeminent at the Esalen Institute and still are were into theosophy, and they saw it as maybe one of the contenders for how to create a universal mind, a universal consciousness, kind of a global religion type thing. In fact, I was just now reading in the second half of H.G. Wells's New World Order book, where he talks about creating a cult. He says maybe a giant global cult could be the real way to bring in the New World Order. It's literally what he says. So I did a talk, for example.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. On Marilyn Ferguson's pretty famous book, Aquarian Conspiracy. And she's really echoing the line of Esalen there in that book. And the book Acquiring Conspiracy is not a conspiracy book. It's actually, she's actually for it. She's like, yes, we're here to create this, global consciousness, this new world order. It's going to be, hopefully centered around New Age religion, changing all the institutions and so forth, blah, blah, blah. So I have a whole talk I did on Marilyn Ferguson's book that's very relevant. But I already forgot what was the question.
I forgot to. Oh, it was like 8 questions in one. You should see the next one I got, which I rejected.
Something about global religion or Esalen. I forgot what it was.
It was, what do you think about them? Tavistock, social engineering. Yeah. You covered it. And then
there's talks actually on both of those. I would direct that person to the Marilyn Ferguson talk that I did, and the Tavistock talk.
Ferguson. Okay, I got the notes. All right. That's it. So, did you Nish said you had a new book out or coming out?
Well, yeah, it'll be out. I just finished it a couple days ago. It's Esoteric Hollywood 2, so it's the sequel to the first book. It's going to be organized a little different than the first book, which was kind of centered around directors. So the first book was a lot of Spielberg, a lot of Hitchcock, a lot of Kubrick. And this time around, it's more centered around themes. So it begins with Hollywood and the mafia, and espionage and spies and terror, and then it moves to MK Ultra and cults in relationship to film, and then it moves to geoengineering, actually, and how this has been presented in film, and then it moves to transhumanism in film. So it's going to be a little different. I'm kind of stepping out on a limb a little bit to do it, to risk doing it a little different, to try a different approach. And hopefully there will be a trilogy. That's the goal. So, but it'll be out hopefully for sale in the next few months.
Great. Is it going to be through Amazon or on your own site or Lulu or something? Is there somewhere I could link to it to tell people to watch for it?
So what now?
Is there some place I could link to tell people to watch for it other than your website?
I mean, there's pre-order already on Amazon, but because it is traditionally published. So my publisher is Trine Day, that does quite a bit of suppressed shadow government type books, and it'll be the same publisher, Trine Day, but
I'll find it.
But preferably, people would get it if they would get it from me. It's better because Amazon, it's not that great for authors.
No, I know. Plus, you could sign it.
Exactly. That's the pro, is it?
So when you pick your subject, like your first book, you obviously focused on directors and their work, their body of work, talking about the patterns you found in there. And the new one is based on a topic, right? Like you said, geoengineering and whatnot. I kind of answered my own question.
Well, I really didn't know how to do it. I mean, it was kind of a challenge because I had all these film essays that I'd written that were kind of popular and were getting shared a lot. And then I got asked if I had a manuscript, and I was like, yeah, I guess, but I don't know, so I had to come up with how to organize it. And the best that I could come up with was, well, do a Kubrick section and then do a Spielberg section and then do like an 70s and 80s section, and then do Hitchcock, and then do David Lynch. And that was the best I could come up with, was just kind of roughly directors. And then I thought, well, there's hundreds and hundreds of essays that I wrote, and I don't know how to so I didn't want to keep on with directors, because it was like, well, I could do a Scorsese section, but that wouldn't be as big. So I just chose thematic sections for the second book.
No, I'm not saying it's wrong. It's great. I think it's fantastic. I was just curious I was going to ask what thread did you pull on that led you in that direction? So, I know you've seen Kubrick movies, you've seen David Lynch movies and shows and whatnot. So, those things. Did you recognize the aspects you were going to write about before that idea to write the book came about? You know what I mean? Were you seeing this already before? Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So it was like long ago. Well, I say long, 10 years ago, when I was trying to finish undergrad, I had some classes that were pretty interesting that compared film with literature. So that was a really neat class I had that was kind of formative for this. And I remember reading some stuff about Oliver Stone commenting on film, and it actually had quite a bit of an impact on me. I remember I read some interviews that he did where he talked about the tie-in between his films and what was really going on, you know, for example, in the CIA with JFK and McNamara and that kind of stuff. Um, and I remember certain scenes that he put in the film where he, for example, in his Nixon film, he has at one point, I think it's McNamara at CIA starts quoting W.B. Yeats and the poem about the beast. And I remember being struck by that, how like, whoa, you know, and I think it's in like the director's cut of Nixon. And I remember like, whoa, that's crazy that he's got, you know, like the CIA guy reciting this, you know, occultic poem.
Did that really happen?
I wouldn't be surprised, but
no, I wouldn't either. But I mean, I've heard a lot of things.
Not to my knowledge. I think I would guess that Oliver Stone put that in there to, you know, portray him as a dark figure.
Yeah, I'm sure the truth of it is not what we know.
Yeah. But
no, that's cool.
Anyway, that stuck out from that class as something that was very neat. And then I had another class that was related to Oliver Stone, where basically just did Stone films. And so the idea stuck with me that you could actually just write on the relationship between movies and reality. So that's what I started blogging on. And, you know, I didn't actually focus on that. I wrote about a whole bunch of other stuff, but people are more interested in movies than they are philosophy. So, you know, I tried to really just kind of blend all of the arenas that I'm interested in together. And, you know, that's what the first book came out to be. It was just a collection of the essays that I felt made sense to go together. And then that's, you know, kind of what the second book's going to be. But you're right. It's been an adventure in the sense that I didn't really know how to structure it, and it just kind of fell into place.
Oh, that's cool. I think I would call this like you're basically doing synchromistic work in a way.
Yes, to a degree, yeah. But there's also, you know, like an academic aspect to it too. So for example,
of course,
it's not like Vigilant Citizen where it's like, oh, here's an eye, here's a pyramid, therefore conspiracy. No, there's actually, you know, 404 footnotes in the first book. Like it was a lot of research, a lot of reading, a lot of digging.
Yeah, that's what's super impressive, by the way.
Extremely.
Well, thank you. And it's also a lot of right brain stuff where you're trying to write in a way that's entertaining and engaging and prosaic and funny at the same time.
One of the things I look for immediately is footnotes to see, you know, where is all this resting and how much research, you know, that's always your cue. And I don't know, immediately upon seeing that in that book, you powered up for me. Let me put it that way.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
What do you have any thoughts on Michael Crichton?
Actually, yeah, I think I was on a podcast and he came up a little bit. We talked about him for maybe an hour, but I recently did an analysis of the movie Looker, which is Michael Crichton.
Yeah, crazy movie. 1981.
I've watched quite a few of his films, and they usually do have predictive programming, but actually he's just somebody I haven't really gotten to yet, but he's definitely somebody I need to get to. I mean, Westworld ultimately, you know, Crichton.
With Crowley as the art director.
In Westworld?
Yeah.
Aleister Crowley was the art director?
No. I'm sorry. In the new Westworld, Nathan Crowley is the art director.
Oh, and who is that?
He's a relative of Crowley's, of Aleister Crowley's, and he's part of the Chris Nolan team. Chris Nolan's another person you should look at if you haven't.
Well, no, actually, I've written.
Yeah, I know you wrote about him. Yeah,
5, and then we did 3 episodes of Hollywood Decoded on Nolan films. I think
I haven't gotten to those yet.
Yeah, you'll like those. Yeah, so I immersed myself quite a bit in Christopher Nolan for those. That was a lot of work, but yeah, there's a lot of Jungian, you know, depth psychology going on with with the Nolans for sure. In the new book, there is an essay on Westworld. So, but yeah, you're right. I do need to get to more Michael Crichton for sure.
Yeah. And I just found it interesting that he like left film and started doing ER. He created ER, the TV show, which is your time.
Actually, I didn't know that.
Oh yeah. So, and he did that, I think, pretty much until he died.
Well, books are full of stuff. So he was definitely getting information somewhere. And I just finished Annie Jacobson's big fat book on the history of DARPA. And she says at the end of her book that herself and Chris Carter and Gail Ann Hurd, took a special trip to the Pentagon to talk about DARPA. So yeah, it's
probably
this really confirms that the science fiction writers, they do get inside information from the Pentagon, from DARPA.
Totally. Look at, well, not even science fiction. Look at Tom Clancy.
Yes, correct.
So, all right. I think Nish, you wanted me to ask Iwalk's question, but I didn't see it. How do we escape the fuckery?
Yeah, something like that. Counteract. I popped into the chat, and that's right when I popped in and saw that he had a question.
I guess the question was, are there any solutions to avoid the mind control other than completely unplugging?
Well, I mean, I believe Orthodox Christianity really is the solution. So, and I'm sure that will be contentious and a lot of people will disagree, but
no,
that's my view.
Everyone will love that answer. Well, there you go. All right. Well, that's all that we have tonight for you, Jay. Thank you so much for joining us. I've got all your links in the show notes and on this video. And it'll be in the podcast.
Awesome. Do you guys care if I mirror this?
Not at all. If you don't mind, let me get you a clean copy, an edited copy. There'll be the podcast, and I'll send you the thumbnail and everything you need to.
Excellent.
Put it back up.
Jay, thank you so much. This was really a pleasant experience, and I enjoy your work in the world.
Yes, we both do.
You guys were a lot of fun. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. And everyone, thanks for joining us tonight. Be sure to check back next week to see Joshua Cutchin. Forgot he was on next week, who we talked about earlier. Local Georgia boy. So we'll see you next week, and have a great